Nevatim Air Base sits deep in the Negev Desert in southern Israel, far from the coast, far from the border, far from anywhere that has historically felt like the front line of anything. That distance was supposed to be protection. Iran fired missiles at it anyway. The announcement came from Tehran with the specific language of a military organization reporting a mission completed. Iranian state media broadcast statements from commanders, who described a precise, coordinated strike against one of Israel's most critical military installations. Multiple long-range missiles, they said, had been launched toward southern Israel. Several of them, Iranian officials claimed, successfully reached the base and caused serious damage to key sections of the facility. Iranian commentators described the operation as a turning point, proof that Israel's most protected military assets were no longer beyond the reach of Iranian strike capability. No location, the message said, is completely safe anymore. To understand why that claim landed the way it did, you have to understand what Nevatim actually is. It is not a standard Air Force installation. Nevatim is one of the Israeli Air Force's most strategically significant bases, the kind of facility that appears in long-range operational planning, in intelligence coordination, in the targeting decisions that shape Israeli military strategy across the region. It hosts some of Israel's most advanced aircraft. It supports multiple squadrons simultaneously. It is equipped to handle operations that most air bases are not built for. Military analysts who study Israeli air power treat Nevatim the way financial analysts treat a central bank, as the institution whose continued function is foundational to everything else. Iran chose it deliberately. Not because it was an easy target, because it was the hardest one. Within hours of the Iranian announcement, Israeli officials presented a different account. Israel's air defense network, they said, detected the incoming missiles long before they could reach their targets. The country's multi-layered defensive architecture, built through decades of technological development and tested repeatedly during previous confrontations, activated immediately. Interceptors were launched. The incoming missiles were engaged in flight. Several were destroyed before they could descend toward the base. According to Israeli defense authorities, the core infrastructure of Nevatim remained intact and operational. U.S. media reporting, citing defense officials, echoed the same account. The systems worked as designed, they said. Catastrophic damage was prevented. Two narratives, one base, both sides speaking with institutional certainty about the same event. This is the specific information environment that defines this war, and it is worth understanding clearly rather than simply noting and moving past. Iran benefits from presenting the strike as a success, demonstrating the ability to reach Nevatim, to fire missiles at the base where some of Israel's most advanced aircraft are housed, deep in the Negev desert, behind layers of the most sophisticated air defense systems money and engineering can produce, serves Iran's core strategic objective. The objective is not primarily military damage, it is psychological and political. If Iran can convince the Israeli public, the Israeli military establishment, and the international community watching that no Israeli installation is truly safe, then the deterrence value of Israeli air power is degraded without a single aircraft being destroyed. The narrative of the successful strike is itself a strategic asset. Israel benefits from presenting the interception as a complete defensive success. Every allied government whose security cooperation with Israel depends on confidence in Israeli capabilities needs to hear that Nevatim is standing. Every Israeli citizen who lives under the understanding that their military can protect critical infrastructure needs to hear that the system's held. The statement that Nevatim remains operational is not just a factual claim about one base on one day. It is a message about the reliability of the defensive architecture that the entire security relationship is built on. Between those two narratives lies a reality that satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and post-conflict analysis will eventually document more precisely. In the immediate aftermath, certainty is unavailable. What is available is the significance of the attempt itself, because the significance does not depend on the damage count. Iran launched long-range ballistic missiles at Nevatim Air Base. That happened, regardless of how many were intercepted, and regardless of what the damage assessment eventually records. Missiles crossed the distance. They entered Israeli airspace. The defensive systems activated. Interceptors fired. The base went through the specific operational sequence that only happens when something real is incoming. That sequence, the radar detection, the interception calculation, the interceptors launching, the explosions in the sky over the Negev, was visible. It was documented. It was real. And every military planner in every country that is watching this conflict now has to incorporate it into their models, regardless of which narrative about the outcome they accept. Iran demonstrated capability and intent simultaneously. Those two things together are what strategic signaling actually consists of. The capability to reach Nevatim, the willingness to target it. Both of those facts now exist in the world in a way they did not exist before the missiles were fired. Defensive systems intercepting most or all of the incoming missiles does not erase either of those facts. The technological race that this strike illustrates is one of the defining dynamics of modern warfare, and it is playing out in real time in the skies over Israel. Offensive missile systems are designed to travel farther, faster, and with greater precision than the previous generation. Defensive interception systems are designed to detect, track, and neutralize those threats before they reach their targets. The entire engineering and financial investment on both sides is oriented toward gaining a decisive edge in that exchange. Offense tries to overcome defense, defense tries to outpace offense. The conflict between those two trajectories is not a background technical detail, it is the central contest of this war. Iran's missile program has been built with this contest in mind for years. The investment in ballistic missiles, in maneuvering warheads, in the kind of saturation tactics that can overwhelm defensive systems by presenting more simultaneous threats than the interceptors can handle, all of it is designed around the specific question of how to defeat the defensive layers that Israel and the United States have built. The strike on Nevatim was, among other things, a data collection exercise. Every missile fired teaches the offensive side something about how the defensive systems respond, at what range, with what accuracy, in what sequence. Israel's defensive systems have now responded. Iran is studying that response. The broader strategic implications of targeting Nevatim extend well beyond the base itself. Israel's air power is the foundational military asset in the confrontation with Iran. The aircraft based at installations like Nevatim are the platforms that would execute any strike on Iranian nuclear facilities if that decision is ever made. They are the platforms that have already struck targets inside Iran as part of the current campaign. They are the platforms whose continued operational availability is the prerequisite for every Israeli military option that involves more than a defensive response. Targeting Nevatim is therefore not simply an attack on a military base. It is an attempt to threaten the asset that makes Israeli offensive military capability possible. If Iran can damage Nevatim enough to disrupt operations, to damage runways, to destroy aircraft, to degrade the logistical infrastructure that keeps squadrons flying, it changes the military balance of the confrontation in ways that go far beyond the physical damage to one installation. Israeli officials understand this perfectly, which is why their insistence that Nevatim remains fully operational is not simply a public reassurance. It is a strategic communication directed at Tehran. The base is standing. The aircraft are flying. The capability that you tried to degrade is intact. The attempt did not succeed. Iran's insistence that the strike succeeded is directed at the same audience, with the opposite message. Regional governments are watching the exchange between those two messages with the specific anxiety of countries that host their own strategically important military installations, and are now recalculating how well those installations are actually protected. Every government that has been operating under the assumption that distance, defensive systems, and American military presence provide adequate protection for critical infrastructure is now stress testing that assumption against what just happened in the Negev desert. Iran fired long-range missiles at one of the most heavily defended air bases in the Middle East. The defensive systems responded. The outcome remains contested, and the assumption of safety has been made complicated in a way that it was not complicated before. Financial markets registered the strike with the cautious, incremental nervousness that comes from an event whose full implications take time to work through. The strike targeted military infrastructure rather than energy infrastructure directly, which limited the immediate market reaction. But analysts understand the connection. Nevatim's operational status is connected to Israel's ability to protect its own territory and to conduct operations across the region. Israel's ability to conduct those operations is connected to the broader strategic balance that determines whether the Strait of Hormuz stays open, whether Gulf oil infrastructure remains functional, and whether the energy markets that underpin the global economy continue operating under something approaching normal conditions. A missile strike on a desert airbase in southern Israel is, through a chain of dependencies that is longer than most people trace but real at every link, connected to fuel prices in Seoul and food prices in Cairo and shipping costs in Rotterdam. For the people who live inside the range of these missiles, and in the Middle East right now, that means nearly everyone, the Nevatim strike is not a geopolitical abstraction. It is another data point in the accumulating evidence that the rules of the previous era no longer apply. The rules that said certain bases were untouchable. The rules that said certain distances provided meaningful protection. The rules that said the defensive systems, however imperfect, created a reliable enough shield that ordinary life could continue operating in the background while governments and militaries managed the conflict in the foreground. Those rules are being renegotiated in real time, in the skies over the Negev Desert and the Arabian Gulf and the Eastern Mediterranean, by missiles and interceptors and the people who operate them. The outcome of that renegotiation will determine what the Middle East looks like for the next generation, and the people who will live inside that outcome, in Tel Aviv and Tehran and Doha and Dubai and Riyadh and every city across the region, had no meaningful vote in the decisions that set it in motion. Iran says its missiles struck Nevatim. Israel says its defenses held. Between those two statements, the world is still working out what actually happened in the Negev desert. What is not in dispute is that the missiles were fired. That Nevatim was the target, that the defensive systems activated, and that the base, which was supposed to be beyond reach, became the thing Iran aimed at on the day it decided to aim at something that mattered. Nevatim is still operational according to Israel. The aircraft are still flying, the runways are intact, and Iran is already preparing its account of what it will aim at next. Share this with everyone you know right now. Iran fired long-range ballistic missiles at Nevatim Air Base, one of Israel's most critical military installations, deep in the Negev desert behind multiple layers of the most advanced air defense systems in the region. Iran says the missiles hit their targets. Israel says the defense is held. Both sides are certain. The base hosts Israel's most advanced aircraft and is central to every Israeli military option in this conflict. The missiles crossed the distance. The interceptors fired. And the assumption that distance and defensive systems make certain targets unreachable has been tested in a way it was not tested before.